My name is William Carter. I'm 65 years old, and for nearly 4 decades I've poured my heart into a small bakery in a quiet Oregon town. Anna's Pastries, we called it, named after my late wife Anna, whose laughter once filled the air alongside the warm scent of vanilla and rising dough. That bakery, it's more than just a business. It's the story of our life together. Every early morning kneading dough, every late night decorating a wedding cake for a neighbor, every moment we stole to hold hands over a flour-dusted counter. I always thought my daughter Sophie understood that. She grew up in that bakery, her tiny hands shaping cookies, her giggles mixing with the hum of the ovens. But her new husband, Nathan Reed, he only saw a dollar sign where I saw my soul. At their wedding, in front of 150 guests, Nathan raised a glass for a toast. His voice was smooth, his smile polished, promising a bright future. Then out of nowhere, he turned to me. He demanded I hand over the keys to Anna's Pastries as their wedding gift. The room cheered, thinking it was some grand gesture. But I knew better. I said no, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. That's when Nathan's charm cracked. He threw a stack of legal papers on the table in front of me, his eyes cold as he threatened to sue me for standing in the way of Sophie's future. The murmurs of the crowd faded into a heavy silence. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I just looked at Sophie, her face frozen in shock, and walked out. That night, alone in the bakery, I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't even cry. I went to the safe in my office, the one Anna and I had bought when we first opened the shop. Inside was a metal box she'd left me, plain and heavy, with a note in her handwriting. Only open this when you need to protect what matters most. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was a key, a USB drive, a phone number, and a folded letter. I made the call she'd told me to make if the worst ever came. Before I go on, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments below. And if you've ever had to stand up for something precious against greed, hit that like button and subscribe. It means the world. Nathan thought he was dealing with a tired old baker, a man whose hands were only good for rolling dough. He didn't know Anna had left me something stronger than steel. To understand what was in that box, though, you need to know about the quiet battle that started the night before the wedding. It began at the rehearsal dinner, where the first cracks in Nathan's mask began to show. The night before Sophie's wedding. The rehearsal dinner was held at a fancy restaurant perched on the edge of the Oregon coast. The place was all warm candlelight and clinking glasses, with waves crashing softly in the distance. From the outside, we looked like a perfect family. Sophie glowed, her eyes sparkling with love for Nathan, the man sitting beside her, all sharp suit and sharper smile. She was radiant, my little girl, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Nathan wasn't a son-in-law to me, not yet. He was a salesman, and I'd seen his kind before. Smooth talkers who could sell you a dream while picking your pocket. Nathan dominated the table, his voice gliding over the chatter like it was his stage. He poured expensive wine and tossed around words like portfolio diversification and market scalability. Those words felt like sand in my mouth, foreign in the salty air of our little coastal town. He was talking about my bakery, Anna's Pastries, like it was just a line item on a spreadsheet. "Will," he said, leaning toward me with that conspiratorial grin of his, "your shop's sitting on prime real estate. Beachfront access, tourist traffic. You're looking at a gold mine, a small commercial plaza, maybe a chain of branded coffee shops. Now that's a legacy for Sophie." The other guests nodded, sipping their wine, charmed by the word legacy. They heard progress. I heard destruction. My mind drifted back to a spring morning 30 years ago when Anna and I opened the bakery. We'd stayed up all night mixing batter, our hands sticky with dough, laughing as we burned our first batch of scones. That was legacy. Her smile, the way she'd hum while decorating a cake, the way we'd built something honest together. Not Nathan's version. All glass storefronts and neon signs. I gave him a small smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. The bakery's not about dollars, Nathan, I said quietly. It's about heart. Sophie, always the peacemaker, touched his arm. Let's just enjoy tonight, honey, she said, her voice soft but pleading. She was my good girl, but she was dazzled by Nathan's shine. She saw a man who could give her the world. I saw a man who'd burn it down to get what he wanted. Nathan had been circling the bakery for months, dropping hints about underutilized assets and modernizing the business. To him, the wooden counters where Anna taught Sophie to roll out pie crust were just outdated fixtures. The corner where we'd carved our initials into the wall after our first profitable year, just square footage. The dinner ended with toasts and laughter, but his words left a bitter taste like overbaked bread gone stale. I couldn't sleep that night. The restaurant's polished air felt suffocating, so I walked back to the bakery. It was just a mile down the road, and the cool night air smelled of salt and cedar. The shop was dark, but the moonlight spilled through the windows, glinting off the old brass cash register. I ran my hand along the counter, feeling the nicks and scratches from years of love and labor. This was my church, my sanctuary. I stopped at the back wall, where that old carving still sat, W&A, 1987. Anna had laughed so hard that day, her hands shaking as she tried to hold the knife steady. This place is our heart, Will, she'd said years later when the cancer started to steal her strength. Her voice was faint but fierce. Don't let anyone turn it into just a number. I stood there, the memory of her words wrapping around me like a warm blanket against the chill. That's when I thought of the metal box she'd left in the safe. Only open it when you need to protect what's ours, she'd told me, her eyes serious, her hand squeezing mine. I'd nodded, not fully understanding then, but I felt it now. That moment was coming closer. The morning of the wedding dawned bright, the sky too perfect for the storm I felt brewing. I was in my room at the inn, fumbling with a bow tie I hadn't worn in years, when Nathan knocked. He was already in his tux, looking like he'd stepped out of a catalog, but he wasn't carrying a gift. He was carrying a weapon, a sleek leather folder. He shut the door and set it on the dresser. Will, I've got a wedding gift for Sophie and me, he said, his voice low, urgent. And you're the only one who can make it happen. He opened the folder. Inside was a glossy proposal, complete with architectural sketches. The title read, Reed's Coastal Brew, A Modern Coffee Empire. It was a plan to tear down our bakery, replace it with a shiny chain storefront, and turn our quiet corner of the world into a tourist trap. My heart sank as I saw the drawings. Sleek tables where our old oak one stood, a neon sign where Anna's hand-painted one hung. It's a simple transfer, Will, Nathan said, sliding a pen toward me. An LLC to protect you from taxes, maximize profits. For Sophie. He always used her name like a key to unlock my resolve. I didn't touch the pen. I looked at him, at the hunger in his eyes. My answer's no, Nathan, I said, my voice quiet but steady. His smile faltered just for a second before he recovered. We'll talk after the ceremony, he said, his tone sharp like a blade hidden in silk. Think about Sophie's future. He left, but the air felt heavier, like the calm before a storm. I knew then that the wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was a battleground. The wedding day arrived like a dream spun from light and music. The venue was a grand hotel overlooking the Oregon coast, its ballroom draped in soft white linens and glittering with crystal chandeliers. Roses spilled from every centerpiece, their scent mingling with the salt air drifting through open windows. A string quartet played a gentle melody, and laughter floated like bubbles in champagne. My daughter Sophie was the heart of it all. She moved through the room in her white dress, radiant as the sunrise, her smile so bright it almost hid the ache in my chest. Almost. To everyone else, this was a celebration. To me, it felt like a stage, and I was an actor who didn't know the script. Sophie was happy, her laughter ringing out as she danced with her bridesmaids. Every time she looked at Nathan, her eyes glowed with a love so pure it hurt to see. But I couldn't look at her without seeing him. Nathan Reed, polished and perfect in his tailored tuxedo, shaking hands and charming guests. He avoided my gaze, but I felt him watching me, circling like a hawk waiting for the right moment to dive. I sat at my table, nursing a glass of water, trying to focus on Sophie's joy. I told myself I could be wrong about him. Maybe a man could change. But deep down, I knew better. A man might change his suit, but his heart? That's harder to remake. The air shifted when the quartet paused, and a soft clink of silver on glass cut through the chatter. Nathan stood, microphone in hand, his smile commanding the room. He looked like a movie star, all confidence and charm. And when he spoke, the guests leaned in, hanging on his every word. "I just want to say a few words," he began, his voice smooth as the ocean at dawn. He turned to Sophie, calling her his muse, his partner, the love of his life. The crowd sighed, enchanted. Sophie dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, her smile trembling with emotion. I felt my stomach tighten like a rope being pulled taut. This wasn't just a toast. This was his move. He pivoted, his gaze locking onto me across the room. The spotlight followed, pinning me to my chair like a moth under glass. "And I want to thank my father-in-law, William Carter," he said, his voice dripping with warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "A man who built something extraordinary with his own two hands." He paused, letting the words settle, and the guests murmured their approval. They heard gratitude. I heard a trap. "Tonight," he continued, his voice rising with a theatrical flourish, "Will is going to make a gesture that will secure Sophie's future. He's going to hand over the keys to Anna's pastries so we can take it into a new era of prosperity." The room erupted in applause. Glasses clinked, smiles spread, and all eyes turned to me. They thought it was a beautiful moment. A father passing the torch to the next generation. Sophie's face lit up, tears shimmering in her eyes as she looked at me, then at Nathan, believing every word. My heart broke seeing her like that, caught in his lie. She didn't know he was holding a knife to my throat, dressed up as a gift. I stayed seated, my hands steady on the table, my face calm. I didn't clap. I didn't smile. The applause faded into an awkward hum as the quartet hesitated, unsure whether to play. Nathan handed the microphone to his best man and moved through the tables, his stride confident, like a general marching to claim victory. A photographer trailed him, camera ready to capture what they thought was a heartfelt moment. He reached my table, leaning down close, his smile still in place for the guests watching. Up close, his eyes were hard like polished stones. "The keys, Will," he whispered, his voice a low hiss under the music. "Let's not ruin Sophie's perfect day." His breath carried the sharp tang of champagne and something bitter, like his intent. I looked past him to Sophie, still at the head table, her expression flickering with confusion but still trusting. My daughter, my little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder with flour in her hair. I looked back at Nathan, at the man she'd chosen. "I told you this morning, Nathan," I said, my voice soft but firm, meant only for him. "No." His smile twitched, a crack in the mask. For a split second I saw the fury beneath, raw and ugly. "Don't be a stubborn old man," he hissed, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of a chair. "This is happening. Everyone's watching. Hand them over." "No," I said again. It was the only word I had, the only one that mattered. His face twisted, the charm gone, replaced by a sneer of pure contempt. He straightened up, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. With a flick of his wrist, he threw them onto the table in front of me, the pages scattering like leaves in a storm. "You're standing in the way of Sophie's future," he said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Sign it, or I'll drag you through court until you've got nothing left." The room went quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. The quartet stopped mid-note. Conversations froze. Sophie's voice broke through, small and sharp. "Nathan, what are you doing?" Her eyes were wide, her hands trembling as she stood. The photographer's flash popped, capturing the moment, my humiliation frozen in time. I didn't touch the papers. I didn't look at Nathan, still looming over me, his chest heaving. I looked at Sophie. Her face was a mask of shock, the love in her eyes fracturing as she saw her husband for who he was. I held her gaze, pouring all my love, all my sorrow into that one look. Then slowly I pushed my chair back. The scrape of wood on the polished floor was deafening in the silence. I stood, straightened my jacket with steady hands, and turned away. I didn't run. I walked, my steps deliberate, through the sea of stunned faces. Past the roses, past the half-eaten wedding cake with its delicate sugar flowers. Past the life I'd dreamed for my daughter. I reached the grand double doors, pushed them open, and stepped into the cool, dark night. The weight of the ballroom fell away, leaving only the sound of my own heartbeat. I drove back to the bakery, the familiar roads a blur under the stars. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside something burned. Not just anger, but purpose. I didn't go to the house. It felt too raw, too full of Anna's absence. Instead, I pulled up to the bakery, the place that had always been true. I unlocked the back door, the air inside heavy with the scent of sugar and yeast. In my office, a small room tucked behind the ovens, I sat at my desk under the glow of a single lamp. The safe was there as it always had been, holding the weight of our life's work. I spun the dial, my fingers steady despite the storm in my chest. The door creaked open, and there it was, Anna's metal box, plain and unadorned just as she'd left it. I lifted it out, set it in the pool of light on my desk, and opened it. Inside was a key, a USB drive, a phone number, and a letter in her handwriting. My fingers traced her words, and I made the call. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The drive back to Anna's pastries was quiet, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. The coastal roads wound through the dark, the headlights catching glimpses of cedar trees and the distant shimmer of the ocean. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my heart was heavy. Each beat an echo of Nathan's papers hitting the table, of Sophie's shocked cry. The sting of that moment wasn't just in his words or the scattered documents. It was in her eyes. The way they flickered from love to confusion, like a candle caught in a draft. I didn't go to the house. It felt too empty without Anna, too raw with the weight of what had just happened. Instead, I pulled up to the bakery, the gravel crunching under my tires, the only sound in a sleeping world. Inside, the air was cool and familiar, thick with the faint sweetness of yesterday's baking. The ovens stood silent, their warmth gone, but the place still felt alive, like Anna's spirit lingered in the worn counters and scuffed floors. I walked past the display case where we used to set out trays of her famous lemon tarts, and headed to the small office in the back. It was a cluttered space, a desk piled with invoices, a creaky chair, a window looking out to the alley where Sophie used to play as a kid. I didn't turn on the overhead light, just the small desk lamp, its soft glow pooling around me like a spotlight on my grief. I sat for a long time, the silence wrapping around me. The anger from the wedding had cooled, hardening into something sharper, something useful. Purpose. I thought of Anna, of the way she'd always known what to do when the world turned hard. She'd left me that metal box, tucked away in the safe we'd bought when we were young and dreaming big. Only open it when you need to protect what's ours, she'd said, her voice steady even as the cancer stole her strength. Her eyes had held mine, fierce and certain, and I'd promised. Now that moment had come. I spun the dial on the safe, the combination as familiar as my own heartbeat. Our anniversary, the day we opened the bakery. The door groaned open, and there it was, the metal box, plain and heavy, no bigger than a loaf of bread. I lifted it out, set it on the desk, and ran my fingers over its surface. It wasn't fancy, just honest steel, dented from years of being moved around. For a moment I hesitated. Part of me wanted to find a letter from Anna, something soft to ease the ache. But I knew her better than that. She wasn't one for sentiment when the stakes were high. She was a fighter, and this box was her arsenal. I opened the lid. No scent of old paper or dried flowers greeted me. Instead, there were 4 items, laid out with the precision Anna always brought to her work. First, a small leather-bound notebook, the kind she used to jot down recipes. I flipped it open and my breath caught. It wasn't recipes, it was a ledger. Her neat handwriting cataloged every dollar Nathan had borrowed from us. June 10th, 2021, $5,000 for a business deposit. March 3rd, 2022, $8,000 for urgent home repairs. Page after page, the story unfolded. $3,000 for a medical bill, $10,000 for a tax issue. Always with a promise to pay us back, always for Sophie. The final page had a number circled in red ink, $60,000. $60,000 we'd given him, believing his lies, and he'd repaid us with a threat. My hands shook as I closed the book, not with anger but with clarity. Beneath it was a silver USB drive, cold and unassuming. I pulled out my old laptop, the one we used for inventory, and plugged it in. A single folder popped up. NR Financials. I clicked, and a maze of spreadsheets and bank statements spilled across the screen. It was a portrait of desperation. Maxed out credit lines, failed real estate deals, loans piling up like storm clouds. Nathan wasn't just greedy. He was drowning. The $60,000 we'd given him was a drop in the bucket compared to the millions he owed. I leaned back, the weight of his lies settling over me. Anna had known. Somehow she'd seen through him. Next I found a thick manila envelope sealed with a wax stamp, the kind Anna used for her Christmas cards. Typed across the front were the words, "Partnership Agreement and First Right of Refusal, Pacific Ventures." My heart skipped. Pacific Ventures? I knew the name. Eleanor Hayes, Anna's old friend, ran it. Years ago, Anna had invested in Eleanor's startup, a small act of faith that helped her build a company focused on preserving local businesses. But what did this have to do with the bakery? I set the envelope aside, my mind racing. At the bottom of the box was a tiny digital recorder, no bigger than a key. I pressed play, and Nathan's voice filled the room, slick and condescending. "Anna, think about the potential," he was saying. "The bakery's charming, but it's small time. With my vision, we could turn it into a brand. Sophie deserves that." Then came Anna's voice, weak from her illness but sharp as a blade. "Nathan, the bakery isn't a brand. It's our home. The answer is no, and don't you dare go behind Will's back again." The recording clicked off, and the silence was heavier than before. My throat tightened. Anna hadn't just been baking in her final days. She'd been building a fortress. I picked up the phone and dialed the number from the box. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Thomas Bennett. Thomas had been our lawyer for decades, a friend who'd stood by us through Anna's funeral. "Will, it's late," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "What's wrong?" I told him everything, the wedding, Nathan's demand, the papers, the humiliation. My voice stayed even, like I was reporting a broken oven, but inside a storm was raging. When I finished, Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't call Sophie. Don't call anyone. Lock the doors and sit tight. I'll be there at dawn." He paused. "And Will? Open the box. It's time." I looked at the items spread out on my desk. The ledger, the USB, the envelope, the recorder. This wasn't a box of memories. It was a weapon, forged by Anna's love and foresight. And then it hit me, the first twist in her plan. That envelope from Pacific Ventures wasn't just a contract. It was a shield. Anna had tied the bakery to a project called Pacific Heritage Foods, a venture to protect family businesses from corporate greed. If Nathan ever got his hands on the bakery, Eleanor's company had the right to buy it back at a fixed price, ruining his dreams of a coffee empire. Anna hadn't just protected our past. She'd secured our future. The sun was just breaking over the Oregon hills when Thomas Bennett's car pulled up the gravel drive to Anna's Pastries. I watched from the bakery's office window. The metal box still open on my desk, its contents laid out like pieces of a puzzle Anna had left me to solve. Thomas stepped out, briefcase in one hand, a thermos of coffee in the other, his face etched with the kind of steady resolve I needed right now. He didn't knock, just walked in, his eyes catching the faint bruise of exhaustion under mine. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" or "I told you so." He just looked at the items on the desk, the ledger, the USB, the recorder, the sealed envelope, and nodded. "This is Anna's battle plan," he said, his voice low and certain. "Let's get to work." We sat in the dim light of my office, the air still carrying the faint sweetness of yesterday's baking. Thomas poured us coffee, the steam curling between us as he examined each piece with the care of a man defusing a bomb. He started with the ledger, flipping through Anna's meticulous notes on Nathan's loans. $60,000, he murmured, shaking his head. "It's a clear pattern of manipulation. Not illegal, but it's ugly." Next, he plugged the USB into his sleek laptop. The screen lit up with Nathan's financials, a tangle of red numbers, failed investments, and debts so deep they made my head spin. "This is motive," Thomas said, his voice hardening. He didn't just want the bakery. He needed it to keep his house of cards from collapsing. He picked up the recorder, holding it like it was made of glass. We listened together as Nathan's voice, slick and patronizing, filled the room. "Anna, the bakery's charming, but it's small time. Sophie deserves more." Then Anna's voice, thin from her illness but sharp as ever. "The bakery's our home, Nathan, not a brand. Don't go behind Will's back again." The silence after the recording clicked off was heavy like the air before a storm. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. "Character," he whispered. "This shows who he really is." Finally, he reached for the manila envelope, its wax seal unbroken. "What's this?" he asked. I nodded for him to open it. He slid it with a pocket knife, pulling out a thick document bound in blue. His eyes scanned the pages, first quickly, then slowing as his eyebrows lifted. A low whistle escaped his lips, a sound I hadn't heard from him in years. "My God, Will," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. Anna was a genius. He turned the document to show me the signature page, Anna's name clear and strong next to Eleanor Hayes, the head of Pacific Ventures. 5 years ago, Thomas explained, Anna got wind that developers were eyeing small businesses like yours for commercial projects. Most owners sold. Anna didn't. She struck a deal with Pacific Ventures, Eleanor's company, to make the bakery the cornerstone of their Pacific Heritage Foods project, a network of family businesses preserved for their cultural value, not profit. He pointed to a clause in the contract, his finger tracing the dense legal text. This is the genius part. It's a first right of refusal with a poison pill. If the bakery's ownership ever transfers to anyone outside the Carter family without Pacific Ventures' consent, they can buy it back at a preset price, a fraction of what Nathan's dreaming of. If he'd gotten those keys, he'd have triggered this clause and his coffee empire would have been dead before it started. I stared at Anna's signature, my heart swelling with pride and grief. She hadn't just built a bakery, she'd built a fortress. We didn't wait for Nathan to make the next move. I was done waiting. Anna had given me a weapon and I was ready to use it. "Call Eleanor," I said, my voice steady. "Tell her someone's trying to steal the heart of her project." Thomas nodded, picking up his phone. His call to Pacific Ventures' legal counsel was brief, calm, and devastating. "On behalf of William Carter, owner of Anna's Pastries," he said, "we're reaffirming our commitment to the partnership agreement. We also wish to report an attempt by Nathan Reed to fraudulently gain control of this asset." The words were simple, but they were a spark in dry grass. I didn't know it then, but that call sent a shockwave across the country. Nathan was in Hawaii, probably on some overpriced balcony overlooking turquoise waves, spinning lies to Sophie about his outburst at the wedding. I can picture him all charm and apologies, blaming the stress, the champagne, anything but himself. Then his phone would have pinged, an email from his lead investor. The subject line cold. Project Coastal Brew. Funding terminated. The message would have been brutal, citing instability of key assets. His dream was crumbling. Before he could catch his breath, another ping, a summons from Pacific Ventures board, demanding his presence in Portland within 48 hours to answer for breaches of fiduciary duty. He was trapped. his paradise turning to ash. 2 days later, Thomas and I were in Portland, on the 40th floor of Pacific Ventures headquarters. The office was all sleek glass and polished wood, a world away from my flour-dusted counters. Eleanor Hayes stood at the head of a long conference table, her presence quiet but commanding, her silver hair catching the light from the city skyline behind her. I hadn't seen her since Anna's funeral, but her handshake was warm, her eyes sharp with understanding. "William," she said softly, "Anna would be proud." She glanced at the faint tension in my jaw, and I knew she understood everything without a word. We sat, a united front, as the door opened and Nathan walked in. Or rather, he stumbled in, his expensive suit wrinkled from the rushed flight, his face pale and slick with sweat. The confidence he'd worn like armor was gone, replaced by a jittery desperation. He started to speak, a forced smile on his lips. "Gentlemen, Eleanor, sorry for the delay." His voice died as his eyes landed on me. The shock hit him like a physical blow, his mouth opening and closing like he'd seen a ghost. He couldn't fathom it, me, the old baker, sitting in this tower of power. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice calm but cutting. "Mr. Reed, let's discuss your attempt to undermine a binding contract." Thomas laid out the evidence piece by piece, the ledger showing $60,000 in unpaid loans, the USB, a map of Nathan's financial ruin, the recorder playing his own words back to him, slick and deceitful, and the contract, Anna's masterstroke, locking the bakery out of his reach. Nathan shrank in his chair, his excuses crumbling. Then came the second twist. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice soft but unyielding. "Anna didn't just protect the bakery, William. She set up a trust fund for Sophie, tied to Pacific Ventures. It activates only if she returns to work at the bakery carrying on your legacy." My heart stopped. Anna hadn't just saved our past. She'd insured our daughter's future, too. Eleanor turned to Nathan. "Pacific Ventures is acquiring your debts, effective immediately. Your assets are frozen. Our legal team will handle the fraud allegations with the district attorney." Nathan didn't fight. He just collapsed, a small, broken man in an oversized suit. Anna's plan had outplayed him from beyond the grave. The days after the meeting in Portland were quiet, like the calm after a storm. The bakery felt different now. Not just a place of work, but a battlefield where Anna's love had won. I went back to my routine, kneading dough at dawn, the familiar rhythm of my hands in the flour grounding me. The ovens hummed, the air filled with the warm scent of cinnamon and yeast, and I found comfort in the small things, shaping loaves, icing cookies, watching the morning light spill across the counter where Anna and I had built our life. About 2 weeks later, I saw a car pull up the gravel drive. It wasn't Thomas's sedan or a delivery truck. It was Sophie's, moving slowly like she wasn't sure she'd be welcome. She sat in the driver's seat for a long time, her silhouette still against the setting sun. When she finally stepped out, my heart ached. She looked smaller, her designer clothes replaced by a simple sweater, her eyes heavy with a pain I knew too well. She walked toward me in the bakery's front yard where I was sweeping the porch, her steps hesitant on the uneven ground. "Dad," she said, her voice barely a whisper, cracking under the weight of everything unsaid. I set the broom against the wall and looked at her. My Sophie, the girl who'd once danced around the bakery with flour on her cheeks. Her face crumpled, tears spilling silently at first, then in shuddering sobs. She stumbled forward and I caught her, wrapping her in my arms like I did when she was little, when a scraped knee was the worst hurt she knew. "I was so blind," she choked out, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have seen him for what he was. I didn't say, 'I told you so.' I didn't say, 'It's okay.' The wounds were real and they'd need time." Instead, I held her until her sobs quieted, the way Anna always did for us. I stepped back, wiped a tear from her cheek, and walked to the bakery's storage closet. I pulled out Anna's old apron, faded but clean, the one she'd worn when teaching Sophie to make her first batch of cookies. I held it out to her. She looked at it confused, her fingers brushing the worn fabric. The dough doesn't hold grudges, Sophie, I said softly. It doesn't care about last season's mistakes. It only cares what you bake today. A small, trembling smile broke through her tears. She took the apron, and for the first time in months I saw a spark of the girl she used to be. 6 months later, the bakery was alive again. A new sign hung out front carved from cedar. Carter Family Bakery Foundation in partnership with Pacific Ventures. Sophie was back, not as a visitor but as part of the place. She led baking classes for local kids, her laughter mixing with theirs as they rolled out dough. Her fancy heels were gone, replaced by sturdy boots dusted with flour. She'd found her way home. One afternoon, Eleanor Hayes stopped by and we walked through the bakery, sharing coffee and Anna's lemon tarts. We didn't talk about contracts or Nathan's downfall. We talked about the harvest moon, the new recipe Sophie was trying, the simple things that make a life. At the counter where Anna and I had carved our initials, I poured 2 cups of coffee and raised mine. To Anna, I said, my voice steady. Eleanor raised hers, her eyes warm. To the things that endure, she replied. We drank, the coffee rich and warm, tasting of promises kept. This story isn't about revenge. It's about love, the kind that builds something lasting, something greed can't touch. True strength isn't in fighting back with fists or words. It's in holding fast to what matters, in planting seeds for a future you might not see. What's the legacy you hold dear? Share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.